Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer and a writing instructor in higher education. And this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversation with other writers. Amy M Alvarez is a poet, educator, and scholar. Her work focuses on race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, regionality, nationality, borderlessness, systemic injustice, and social justice. She has been awarded fellowships from Canto Mundo, Voices of Our National Arts Foundation, or VONA, Macondo, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Furious Flower Poetry Center. Her poetry has appeared in nationally and internationally recognized literary journals including Crazy Horse, the Missouri Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, Prism International, Rattle, and elsewhere. Her work has also been anthologized in literary anthologies and textbooks. Currently, Amy is an editor for the upcoming COVID-centered anthology, Essential, Vulnerable Voices. Born in New York City to Jamaican and Puerto Rican parents, she now lives in Morgantown, West Virginia, and is a teaching assistant professor at West Virginia University. And this is my conversation with Amy. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How's everything? How's the new semester starting for you?
Oh, geez. Well, I'm keeping my head above water, given the circumstances. What about you?
Same. I think that's where we all are right now.
So, what are you working on now and what motivated the project?
Sure. Right now I'm working on an anthology. It's called Essential Voices. It's focused on folks whose voices have been marginalized in various ways and what they have to say about COVID-19 and their experiences during the pandemic. So the anthology includes many folks who are currently incarcerated or recently released. We have a piece from someone who was held by ICE. We have pieces from folks who work in healthcare, from people who are Black, Asian, Latinx, et cetera. So it's just kind of really looking at various voices during the period of COVID-19 for LGBTQ folks who were doing work and who were alive during the AIDS crisis of the 1980s, really kind of gathering those voices and having them kind of speak in chorus about the pandemic. So that's one project that I'm currently working on. Currently the manuscript is with WVU Press. So that's something that's that's hopefully forthcoming this winter or fall.
And it's the anthology that's coming from
WVU Press. Yes, so that's the anthology. I'm also working on a manuscript of my own poems, which will probably be forthcoming in 2022.
And what is that new collection about?
The new collection is, it's always really difficult when people ask me, like, what are the poems about? It's not kind of a project book in any way. It's kind of scattered. It's very experiential. It's kind of looking at the experience of many things. Immigration for my family. It's looking at the experience of enslavement and kind of how that becomes a through line in the journeys of many Black people in the United States and within the Americas in general. It's kind of a broader book in some ways. A lot of it's about personal experience. There are kind of many threads that I'm trying to make dance together right now. So that's why the manuscript is forthcoming in 2022. That's kind of where it is right now. So right now I'm working on that project. I have some poems out. Ilya Kaminsky is supposed to read some of my work this fall for Plowshares. Kind of made it through the first round of editing. The poetry editor really liked it, so it's been sent on. So that's kind of where things are right now with poetry.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to read both the anthology and your new book that's coming out. So what have you learned about yourself through writing?
I don't think there's anything I've learned about myself in my life that hasn't come through writing in some way, shape, or form. I think through writing, I've learned not just about myself and kind of about my own interiority, but also about the world, how to be more compassionate, how to be more empathetic, how to be a better human being. I think writing takes us places that are more reflective, philosophical. It kind of brings us to places that we don't necessarily want to go. There isn't a whole lot of choice, I think, when you sit down with the page about what's going to come out. and things that you block will come up in another way. So I feel like those are, I guess, kind of the things that I've learned. Like what you block will come forth in another way, kind of letting things come to you, not being afraid of what you have to say or what other people have to say, and just kind of being open to what is, I think.
Wonderful. So writing for you is a place where you have no choice but to deal with your own issues.
I mean, truly, that's kind of how life is, right? There's no escaping when something is in front of you. When you're teaching, for example, right, you're dealing with a conflict or with an issue, you have to deal with the person who's in front of you. You have to deal with the situation that's in front of you, and you have to do so with compassion, whether it's towards yourself or towards someone else.
What is the role or responsibility of writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
That's a really good question. I feel like a lot of my writing is a response to both personal experience, but also to what I see in the world around me. I think a lot of what keeps me writing is just thinking about the idea of justice and what does that look like, not only for myself or for people who might share some of my identities, but more globally for people who are oppressed, and kind of thinking about what are the ways that my writing can bridge a gap or help someone else understand someone else's experience or my own experience. And I think that's kind of what keeps me writing. It's thinking about the idea of how do we press forward in terms of the idea of justice, and not just for human beings, but also thinking about things like the natural world. How do we kind of push back against ideologies that are not conducive to living things, whether they're human or otherwise?
When you're struggling to write for whatever reason, maybe too many ideas, not enough ideas, time, whatever it is, what strategies do you use to get yourself to the page?
I feel like that's always kind of a struggle, I think, for all writers. I think journaling sometimes just kind of forces me back to the page when I've been away for a while. So, the classic morning pages, whether it's in the morning or whether it's like, 7 p.m. and the day is over, I feel like, well, the day is over in that, I'm not in a classroom anymore, but sitting maybe at home thinking about what's for dinner. But I feel like kind of forcing yourself to write several pages and just kind of push all of the junk of the day out kind of refocuses, I think, writer's energy. So you can kind of really focus on, okay, so like, that's not really the thing I want to write about, but there are all these other layers that are kind of coming up as I continue to write through and process what's been going on. I think writing exercises are really valuable. I think we can kind of create weird exercises for ourselves, depending on what we're working on or kind of thinking about. So I have mentors who've talked about just writing like just lines of similes or metaphors, or writing lists of questions for yourself and then answering them. I think there are a lot of really playful ways to re-engage with writing rather than trying to force something out. Or, I mean, I have know a lot of folks who are like, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a sonnet right now. That doesn't work for me. That's not really a process that I engage well with. But I feel like, whatever it is that gets you back to the page, whether it is like, I'm going to sit and write a sonnet or a haiku or whatever it might be, or kind of like writing pages and pages to kind of refocus an idea. Those are ways that bring me back into writing when I feel like I don't have time or I'm not able to do this right now, but I know I need to.
It's one of my favorite strategies because it's so much less pressure than
Yes.
sitting down and saying, okay, I have to write a poem with a cohesive idea that makes sense and somebody would want to read, and I don't embarrass myself.
Exactly. I feel like journaling, and oftentimes as you're journaling and kind of spewing things, you end up writing a poem. And that happens pretty frequently for me. You're like, oh, okay, like here's this concept. And then something kind of comes to you. And then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, I can think about this in terms of delineation. I can start thinking about this in terms of form. And then it starts to go somewhere and you start to move away from journaling, and kind of whatever mode that you typically work in as a writer, whether you're kind of getting back on your laptop or whatever it might be. I also journal by hand. I tend not to. And oftentimes first drafts are also by hand, but that kind of depends. Sometimes it's just right into a Word doc or whatever it may be.
What is your favorite part of the writing process and why?
Oh, favorite part of the writing process. I think there's something really magical that happens in the shift from first draft that's handwritten to typing up that first draft. It's a very strange thing to say, but I feel like that's where the real poem sort of begins. It kind of goes from being something that's an idea, that's a concept, that's not really for public consumption, to being something that is more formed. You start kind of changing your mind as you're kind of retyping it or thinking about the line in a slightly different way or looking at stanza in a different way. And it's kind of this exciting moment for me where I feel like this is moving toward being something that's real. That's sort of something that I really value and feel excited by. And whenever I think about the writing process for me, that's always the kind of magic moment, I think.
Exactly. I think we often undervalue the power of that transcription process, right? So
Yes.
so much happens in the brain between that paper draft to the digital draft, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a revision, right? That's the revision process. I guess I'm not naming it that because I feel like then there's like the third and the fourth draft. That's like the real revision, but there's something about that initial revision process where you're kind of taking it from one mode to another that feels kind of transcendent in a way, that you're kind of opening up the possibility of this being received by someone else and kind of thinking about that energy that you're bringing to the piece. It's not just for you, that it's something that's bigger than you. And I think that's really exciting. Yeah. And I think that's probably the most joyous part of my process. There's something that's done and I'm starting to kind of recraft and shape it and really revise it and get it into a mode where I can, sit with it, work with it before I send it out into the world.
So that brings us to revision. What revision strategy or strategies do you find useful for writing your work? Why? And what sort of problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
So that's the thing I've been thinking about a lot. I think reading aloud helps a lot. Just hearing the language, hearing what works and what doesn't work. I think that's one approach. I've been trying a lot of really radical revision strategies with some of my work, like literally tearing the work apart and rethinking about kind of reshaping it, working with it in a completely different mode. I ended up taking a poem that I'd written years ago and ended up rewriting as a contrapuntal piece. So that's a whole other thing that really kind of, I think, really made the poem work. So suddenly went from being this poem where I'm just like, I don't know where this fits into my manuscript. I don't know what this poem is really trying to say, to being something where it's extremely clear to me what the poem is doing. The radical revision of it and kind of pulling it apart has really helped. I kind of started that process by sort of commenting on the poem itself. It was kind of just writing ideas and kind of pulling apart what I thought I was doing in this sort of humorous way, but also with, I think some humor, a little bit satirical, but also this kind of grounding, I think, that happened. You're kind of starting to pull it apart and really think about, okay, what was I trying to say? What did I want this poem to be versus what it is? And that really informed this very radical revision of this piece. So I'm kind of excited about that piece now and thinking about what that can be, what that can do in my book that it obviously was not doing before. But I think that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of just thinking about it is like in that initial process of kind of moving from handwritten work for me to, as I'm shaping it, I was writing a piece this summer where I started to realize that it was not rhymed or kind of, I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of meter, but I started thinking about it in terms of line. I was like, oh, this feels like a ballad. This is something that's mourning and also celebrating. And so I felt that I wanted to have these kind of 4-line stanzas throughout the piece. It was a long piece for me. So it was a really interesting way that just kind of reshaping it really started to help me think about the poem and what it needed to become as I was writing it.
Wonderful. That sounds like a great revision activity. So as far as reading suggestions, what reading suggestions do you have? What authors do you keep in your back pocket and why?
Ooh, right now I'm reading a lot of Arthur C. I really am enjoying his work. It's really just beautiful work. The ways in which he writes about the natural world and kind of pairs that with the scientific, I think is really just, it's really, again, I don't use transcendent too much, but I feel like that work is particularly transcendent. I really enjoy it. I think Claudia Rankine is always fascinating for me. The ways in which prose and poetry sort of dance on the page for her are really engaging. I just finished Semi-Automatic by Evie Shockley, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There's also some interesting work with image in the center of the book, the ways in which she's using illusion. She makes these allusions to Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and is writing about very specific characters. It's really, really well done. The entire book is astounding. I guess kind of back pocket writers, folks I kind of return to again and again. June Jordan is someone I return to a lot, I think, just because of the social justice threads that are in her work. When I'm thinking about form, I return to Patricia Smith a lot, just thinking about the ways in which form is, it seems so effortless in her work. I know it's effortful, but she's remarkable, and you don't see any of the work. It's absolutely beautiful and astonishing what she can do with a villanelle or sonnet. Yeah, I guess those are kind of ones I'm thinking of right now. I guess that's all I have at the moment. There's just some I return to a lot.
Thank you so much for making time to hang out with me. I know this semester is crazy for all of us, but I really do appreciate you taking the time out to be part of this series.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I'm so glad that you're doing this, and I look forward to seeing more of these as you continue to work on them.